Hello and welcome to the Game Business Show. This week, recently laid off King staff claim they were being replaced by artificial intelligence. Krafton has publicly fallen out with the leadership of its studio Unknown Worlds, and Roblox has launched a new licensing platform. But our big topic of the week is a little different actually to what we've done in the past. Genvid CEO Jacob Navok, who's also the former director of business at Square Enix, put together a Twitter thread, an X thread on Square Enix, the Microsoft layoffs, AI and Metcalfe's law, and sort of discusses the current realities facing video game companies. It's created plenty of conversation amongst senior leadership in video games. So I thought, why not dive into that and the conversation that has started? And who better to discuss this very thing than our guest host this week? It is Jacob Navok. Hello, Jacob. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
For those who are listening that may not know who you are or who Genvid is, why don't you start a little bit of an introduction? Who are you? What do you do?
So my name is Jacob Navok. I'm the CEO at Genvid. I've been running this company for close to 10 years now, which is scary to think about. We started off doing interactivity for the Counter-Strike majors. We ran a whole bunch of them for Twitch and for Valve back before COVID. From there, we did Rival Peak for Facebook, which had about 100 million minutes viewed and starred Will Wheaton.
Yeah.
After that, we did Pac-Man Community with Bandai Namco, The Walking Dead Last Mile with Skybound, Silent Hill Ascension, which I won an Emmy for. Just launched a little while back DC Heroes United with Warner Brothers. And we've got some other exciting stuff coming this fall. Before starting this company, I spent a third of my life in Japan. And I ran worldwide business development and strategy for Square Enix Holdings, which is the parent of the Square Enix Group. I worked for two CEOs of Square Enix, Yoichi Wada as well as Yosuke Matsuda. My title in Japanese was Shachotsuki, which means attached president, but which English would basically means president's office. Square Enix Holdings is the very small parent entity that manages the entirety of the group. And so I've been in the industry now 2 decades, going on my third in a few years.
Yeah.
Scary to think about.
Yeah. Genvid is this, it's interactive sort of live events is the sort of...
Yes, exactly.
What does that actually involve?
Well, for example, in our DC Heroes United game, we have a TV show where the audience is influencing what's happening on a regular basis. And the way in which you influence it is by playing its associated video game that allows you to generate the points you need to be part of decisions with regard to the show.
Okay.
For example, should Clark Kent tell Lois Lane that he's Superman? And all this as a community lets you influence the content that you're seeing. So a lot of the writing staff are ex-Telltale or chief creative officer. Stefan Guy was the chief creative officer at Telltale, then at DJ2, who did the Sonic movie. And before that, he was at 12 years at Pixar, working on WALL-E, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, and stuff like that. So, we're a team who come from storytelling and writing stories with branching narrative.
Interesting. Well, but it makes your opinions or your analysis, let's say, even more fascinating. So let's talk about this Twitter X thread. Actually, it probably makes sense to recap it a little bit. I can't assume everybody listening to this has read the thread because it goes back to your time looking over the annual reports at Square Enix, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Because even then, Wada-san was talking about networks being the future.
Right.
And he wasn't necessarily thinking about the networks that we know today. So I'll let you take it off.
So we used to be in the business of selling you a game, right? I went to join Square Enix because I loved Final Fantasy, and you'd play Final Fantasy 7 and then move on to your next game, and your next game, hopefully you bought Final Fantasy 8 2 years later, Final Fantasy 9 2 years after that. And that was the way in which we thought about content. Similar to consuming movies or music, you were just constantly looking for that next hit of something to do. But as the industry began to change, we saw first the onset of MMOs, then the onset of always-on mobile titles, and then the onset of titles like Fortnite, where it just never ends. There is no other content to go to. They give you new experiences forever. And that means as an industry, we've changed from being closer to the movie business toward being closer to social networks, where there's just constantly new content being created by people, creators, by the developers themselves. And that is a radically different business than the one that we had been in as an industry for a very long time, because there are not many winners in the social network space, which is to say, like, Facebook bought Instagram, bought WhatsApp. Since then, we've had Snapchat, which has been fairly minor. And after that, TikTok. And that's on, 20 years of social networks? I mean, they destroyed Friendster and MySpace. You barely even remember them. And so once you get these social networks, which are really driven by Metcalfe's law, which is, the value of a network increases as more users come to it, you don't really get out of that space. You stay in there kind of endlessly. And those companies are ruthlessly efficient at driving network value and making sure that if new social networks come up, that they are able to kind of very quickly spin up something similar. So do you remember, in early COVID when Clubhouse was very popular?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then X introduced Spaces and Facebook introduced audio. They just are really, really, really good at making sure that they copy everything. And so if you've got a platform like a Roblox or a platform like a Fortnite, you're going to find that many of the kind of great gaming ideas start to be built, if not by the developers themselves, by others in the community, right? And so there's Grow a Garden on Roblox.
Amazing.
There are people making gardening games on Fortnite right now, and these things just spread. And, we've seen these in microcosms in the past, which is to say, like, Harvest Moon became Stardew Valley, but that was like a 10, 15-year difference in journey between those. These things are instantaneous. Almost overnight, you're going to see these things popping up.
And obviously that's creating a problem for the whole industry in terms of time and discoverability, as in people's time to play games.
Yes.
And this might be a really minor point, but I've always saw TikTok as like a YouTube, as like a video platform rather than a social network.
Right.
But obviously it is a little bit of both. And I think that's what we're talking about here. There's a lot of these platforms, even things like Fortnite. Fortnite's a game,
right,
and it's a platform, it's a tool. I love the way you said that online.
Yeah. It's very hot in Manhattan. I turned off my air conditioning, trying to avoid the noise, but
Jesus.
Yeah, it's miserable in New York right now. When I think of TikTok, I think back to Vine. Vine was a video platform that Twitter acquired, 15 years ago? And they shut it down because even though the functionality is effectively the same as TikTok is today, which is a short form video plus some simple editing tools, didn't get much use. What is the difference between Vine and TikTok? It is the algorithm. It is the AI behind it that gets you interested, engaged in that next piece of content, that next piece of content, that next piece of content. And it's not dissimilar to like a WarioWare style mini game collection, right? And if you're bored with one video, you just swipe to the next one, swipe to the next one, and swipe to the next one. It's incredibly good at giving you this hit of dopamine as you're finding a video you like. And it's very similar to a video game in that way. And as a result, you can literally graph TikTok hours per week going up and gaming hours per week going down. And if you have 1 billion people spending 2 hours more a week on TikTok, where did those hours come from?
Yeah, I think there's an element of red ocean here, right? In that we now live in this industry where if something is going up, something has to be going down, right?
Yep.
It's interesting. Your train of thought, I read the thread, I was really fascinated. And then went back to the beginning, and there was a bit at the beginning talks about network and content. That's what you started talking about on the thread. We moved into a network business. This might seem mad, but I started to question whether or not there is even such a thing as the video game industry. Because I started to wonder to myself, is it really we've got a network industry? And then you've got it could be content industry, could be entertainment industry. I don't know what media industry, you don't know what label you put on that. But you've almost, because I sit there and think of something like TikTok is taking time away from my Switch and Candy Crush in a way and those sort of games, because it's something that I used to do in between things. Now I do that, or I don't just do that, but it's one of the things I do. But I then think of something like Warzone or my game is Sea of Thieves. And that's almost a different, I feel that's a different, I don't just play Fortnite and think that's all, I'm in that world now, I don't need anything else. I do want a story or something a little different, a snack or something like a different type of experience. Let me just get that, the message you said. Would Perfect Dark reboot take any measurable amount of time away from Fortnite, GTA 6 or Call of Duty? Will it grow the market? If not, should I spend on it? This is a question Microsoft should be asking themselves.
Yeah.
But actually, I don't think Perfect Dark was supposed to be about Fortnite or Call of Duty at all. I think it's in the other industry. It's in that media entertainment content industry that lives in, because it's about a story, Blade Runner meets James Bond style, spy thriller. I know this might sound strange, but it actually got me thinking into a completely different way of looking at this industry. You know, if you're making a game like Perfect Dark or making a game like Everwild or those sort of games, are you competing in the Fortnite, the network world, or are you trying to go after the other forms of entertainment? I would argue that a game like Perfect Dark is competing with HBO and Netflix rather than Facebook.
You're making the right point, but the challenge and what's changed about the industry is the cost and audience demand equation have broken. And so there are thresholds where what you're saying is accurate, but from a development forecasting perspective, doesn't work anymore. If you don't mind, I'll illustrate.
Yeah, please do.
And I apologize for cutting you off.
No, I want you to.
Let's pretend we're Phil for a second. I'm going to use completely made up numbers about Perfect Dark. I have no clue. So we've got Daryl Gallagher at the initiative. He's former Square Enix. He was the head of Crystal Dynamics. He rebooted
Tomb Raider. Yeah.
Tomb Raider. Brilliant guy, incredible guy, knows how to build amazing games. It's 2018. We're greenlighting his idea. We love it. We're in the PlayStation 4, Xbox One era, and game budget cost, what, 150 million?
Mm-hmm.
Just pulling a number out of a hat. So game budgets cost 150 million. And if you remember my Square Enix thread last year on how ROI works, it's not just we need to make back 150 million. It's we have to make back 150 million plus the time value of money. So we need to generate, say, $200 million worth of revenue to break even. And also we have marketing costs. We've got other management overhead costs that are publishing side and not just development side. So let's say our real break-even number is probably close to $300 million.
Yeah.
Given marketing costs should be, 50% plus overhead of what have you. And time passes and we're in 2020 now. And you know how game development works, right? We're always perfect and sometimes mistakes get made, but also some things start to change in our industry, right? On the one hand, you have new tools coming out. 2020 saw the release of Unreal Engine 5. It saw Tim Sweeney saying, we're going to reduce the cost of development. Development costs are way too high. And we're producing Lumen and Nanite and all these other tools that should make development cheaper. And we're like, thank God. Hallelujah. And so these new tools come out, but your developers don't really want to use them. We're in the midst of development. We're about to go from prototype to full production. I don't know these tools. I'm going to need 6 months to study them. I face this stuff, right? I had 3 different titles at Genvid. My sound people kept insisting that they use Audio Kinetics Wise instead of Unreal Engine sound tools because they're like, I don't want to learn the new tools. Mm-hmm. We don't want to switch from Unreal 4 to Unreal 5 because it's going to set us back by 6 months. So they don't use the new tools, right? And then as an industry, we start to move away from crunch face development cultures. Well, okay. So if you weren't working, 70, 80 hours and you're now doing 40 hours, all right. Well, time has to go somewhere. By the way, I'm not defending crunch.
No.
That's not the point.
The games are taking the longer, right?
Games are taking longer. Costs are there. And also, I started in this industry in my 20s. I'm in my 40s with a child now. He's 8 years old. Life is different for us.
Yeah.
We're slower. And so game development costs that at the start were 150 million became 200 million. Again, ignoring the marketing and ROI became 250 million. And now we're in 2022. Game is behind, need some changes. Staff costs are up. We didn't adopt the new tools. What's our new budget?
The other bit is obviously there was all that competition for talent during the pandemic when everybody was growing.
It was insane.
All their salaries went up.
Correct.
Then there was the cost of living crisis, which also caused a rising cost of business.
Correct.
So that all had this...
Yeah, I mean, if you hired and staffed up in 2020 and 2021, as we did for several of our projects, you're not going back and telling your staff, hey, sorry, you know what? We overpaid for you several years ago. Please take a pay cut.
Yeah.
You're not able to do that. And so now it's 2024 and your $150 million project now costs $300 million, and that's before marketing. What do you do? Is your demand equation now higher? Do you believe that there are more users? Actually, there are fewer users.
Yeah.
Because your time is now taken by TikTok. And this is the reason you have the layoffs, because you are no longer able to justify the new cost. If you had gone in 2018 and you had said $300 million at 6 years, would that game have been greenlit? Probably not.
It's interesting. I look at a game like Perfect Dark and actually think if you commissioned it today, it would probably be a 35-person team with a load of outsourcing.
Correct.
Made in 3 years.
Exactly.
And it wouldn't be, I think they use the word quadruple A development team. I saw as you would have gone straight to Crystal Dynamics. You wouldn't have gone through the process of trying to build a team. It was a very ambitious thing. And these single player games, Final Fantasy, Perfect Dark, I do believe there was a market for them. I just think that market now needs to scale
down.
Yeah.
Exactly. That is it. You are 100% correct. They cannot produce it because the demand never came. The challenge for a public company is if you are Square Enix and you say, we are going to reduce our revenue forecasts by 20 to 30%, because keep in mind, the way in which they did this was saying development costs are up, market is growing, we will increase price point, ergo we will have higher revenue, because companies must increase revenue.
Yeah.
If you don't have increased revenue over time, you are losing money because of inflation, which is a death spiral. You want to look at the result of those death spirals? Ubisoft. You cannot, as a public company, go and say, we're going to shrink our revenue base. We don't expect as much money in the future, but don't worry, we'll be profitable because our costs are down. That is a hugely problematic statement to make, which is why you see places like Sony saying, we're going to be successful in the games as a service business.
There's generations upon generations, new generations of gamers coming in, and the generations, to be slightly morbid about it, the generations that are sort of dying off are not necessarily gaming generations. So in theory, you should have more players coming in, but you're right, they're going into Roblox. And this is what I found. There was a story, and we were going to talk about it later, but there's a story about Roblox sort of having the licensing division.
Brilliant.
And I just think, when people go from Roblox, where do they go next? And a lot of that's Fortnite. They don't just go to Fortnite. If you look at it like with funnels, like the size of Roblox, then how in terms of users and where that goes. And if I'm trying to grow Final Fantasy, you do need to bring the cost down because the margins don't make sense on it anymore because of the way the industry goes. But I still think there's opportunity for growth. It's just how you deliver that growth might be working with the platforms that are sucking up all the time out of the market. Like there's opportunities within those platforms.
There are more gamers today than there were yesterday because of, older people who didn't play games dying off and younger people like my son coming in and assuming interactivity. But his assumptions on interactivity are very different than mine. So he was 2.5 years old when the pandemic hit. It's March 2020. He's at home. He's not able to go to daycare. And, we're working. We put a phone in his hand. He watches YouTube. He, even at 2.5 years old, is able to learn how to swipe. I remember distinctly, he goes up to the television. He tries to swipe the television and it doesn't react to him. And he starts bawling because it's like, why this broken? I don't understand. And so his generation grows up with interactivity as a default. But those school-based networks are so strong. He doesn't know anything about Pokemon. He has a Pokemon card collection because all of his classmates have them. None of them have really played the video games. They were 5, 6 years old, but they have them. Then they start with Roblox and they start with Minecraft. They have Minecraft themed parties. They go to the Minecraft movie together. I took them. I had 3 7-year-olds all sitting in a row next to me. They were laughing their asses off. That culture is very strong. I've tried to get him to play a Mario game. No interest. Maybe it was 3D stuff. Like I put a controller in his hands, like regular Xbox. I tried to get us to play Spider-Man 2 on PlayStation 5 together. The camera just goes wild. At his age, I was able to navigate these things just fine, but he's so used to a phone and he's so used to phone navigation and the way in which those things work. and he prefers it. And his friends reinforce that. So his only exposure to Mario is having seen the Mario movie last year. That's it. He has none of that memory that I have as a child. And I went to go work for Square Enix because I loved the Final Fantasy series. Next one will be Final Fantasy 17. That's intimidating. Do I think he's going to start at Final Fantasy 17 or be interested in it if he sees that number decided? Probably not. And so these are challenges that a lot of the older IP and a lot of the older places have to navigate. What's interesting is you can use movies and Netflix and TikTok and other things to start to expand your audience and bring those new people in. But I don't think that the games that they're going to play are going to be like what we've been building before. That said, if what Square Enix was doing was building its next great game on UEFN, the business model for UEFN is not set up for that.
Right.
They will never be able to recreate those revenues. And so where do they go from there? I don't know.
It's interesting because obviously we're talking about anecdotal examples here. My son's just started getting into games. He's 5. Even now, it's a little habit of mine. If I'm, in between things, I'll get out Mario Run. So his first touch point of Mario was actually the mobile Mario game.
Yes, makes sense.
And he really liked it. And then he was watching me play Mario Kart World when it came out only a month ago. He's also seen me play Astrobot. I tried to get him to play Astrobot, but he wouldn't control the camera. He'll use the analog stick to move the character around, but he couldn't move the camera behind it. It was too much to begin with. But then in Mario Kart World, they have this open world area where you can just drive around. You don't have to race anything. You're not losing all the time. And I just gave him the controller, and he's learned how to control 3D Mario games. And it turns out all his friends are into Mario Kart, and it's created a whip. But obviously, that's that network effect happening.
Correct.
But anyways, it's sort of a side point to what you're saying there. But here's the thing. I discovered Final Fantasy with Final Fantasy 7. And so did everyone I know who liked Final Fantasy amongst my old friends. It's because that was the PlayStation generation. It brought in a huge new audience of people. And then the people discovered Final Fantasy through 7. And I know that Final Fantasy 7 was a commercial product that you could make money from, and it made sense. But when you see kids discover Final Fantasy through UEFN, even if those aren't the commercial plays, they could be the first experiences of those sorts of things, and movies, obviously, and TV shows, and all these sort of things as the entry points into those franchises. I'd like to hope that through these different platforms that are sucking up a lot of time of consumers, they are potential avenues for these franchises in which to find new audiences. I don't know how effective it is, though, because Nintendo didn't do many more Mario games on mobile after Mario Run. And they didn't.
Nintendo is unique, and I don't like to say that about any company other than them, but they are similar to Disney. They've managed to have their IP remain incredibly strong and resilient, and they think of their products as toys. And they are going to be very comfortable staying in a content business probably for decades to come. But you can't go and be like, you know what? My business strategy is to create Mickey Mouse. That's not a real business strategy for really anybody other than Disney. And so just as you can't build your business on the hopes and dreams of I'm going to be the company who primarily profits off of theme parks, you can't really build your business assumptions off of I'm going to be like Nintendo.
It's weird. When my brain went down the sort of avenue of there isn't a video game industry, there's a network industry, which is where Call of Duty Warzone sits, and then there's a content industry, and that's where Call of Duty single player sits. And you've got these sort of separate things. I actually thought, where does Nintendo fit into that? And I thought, oh, they're in the toy industry.
They're in the toy industry. You're 100% correct, right? There is no other way to think about it because they are incredibly exceptional. If you try to graft them onto normal assumptions, you will fail just because nobody else is able to build a business around intellectual property the way that they have.
We're talking about IP here, but if we step back from IP and just talk about games that are linear experiences, which is what we're saying is a challenge of business here. If we assume that video game industry does exist, go back to that, and we are to widen our audience, to become more ubiquitous, because we make loads of money, but we're not as ubiquitous as film and TV and music. In order to reach what we need, a variety of different experiences. And I think storytelling is a key component to that. Telling stories that reach different people or just inspire. I think that's an absolutely essential part of that. And we talked about Microsoft, and yes, Microsoft shut Perfect Dark, and I've been critical of Microsoft for, or at least that made me sad or cross about the situation, even though I do understand it. They are still investing in those experiences. We saw their summer showcase, the Clockwork Revolution, that new game from Double Fine Keeper. They're still good. They didn't close Ninja Theory. I actually was, when I first heard the rumors, those were the concerns. These smaller studios making games that aren't 10 hours long, that don't really work in Game Pass, and they're still investing in them because I think they still see the value in that these experiences potentially bring in different, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater may not sell millions and millions of copies. In fact, it may sell a lot less now than it did. It does sell a lot less now than it did 20 years ago. But it hits a culture and an audience of people that perhaps don't play games all the time or might come in through this title. And I just think as an industry, as we look to try and find growth, I would like to think that those sort of single player, maybe not single player, but certainly one hit, beginning, middle and end games, as someone calls it, are part of that story.
Well, let me put it this way. And I made this point in the thread and people didn't really pick up on it. And so I do want to reinforce it. I believe that Steam is like YouTube. And I believe that it's a great place for you to be able to find individual 2 to 3 hour videos to watch, right? YouTube is not some jackass with a camera doing tricks or making a funny video of their baby anymore. Like Mr. Beast videos cost what, 10, 50, $100 million to produce these days and generate significant advertising revenue for him, but also are like sometimes 2, 3 hours long. And so you can go to Steam and you can be successful as a creator on Steam if the algorithm gods deem you well on it. And so content lives there on the platform similar to the way it lives on Steam. I also went to see the Superman movie over the weekend. It was great. I saw it in a movie theater. Now, if you were putting $1 into YouTube as a platform, just talking investing into the company, you would see a return far greater than if you put $1 into Paramount or Warner Brothers or anything else. And so those media businesses that make $200 million revenue generating Superman films exist. They are there, but they mostly have had their values supplanted by platforms like YouTube and others like Netflix. And so the amount of movies they make, the type of movies they make, their experience creating movies has not changed, will continue to exist. Theaters are not going to go away tomorrow. But if I had to give you investment advice, I would not suggest you put that money into AMC.
Yeah.
And I don't think that you would do that either.
No, certainly if you want a big return. But you talk about these platforms. Strauss Zelnick, whenever I ask him these sort of questions, he's so matter of fact. And sometimes I used to think he was being dismissive, but I think he just likes to boil it down simply. And he said, like, if everyone's playing on Roblox, everyone's playing Unrelated Fortnite, if everyone's watching on YouTube or whatever it is they're doing, then that's where they put the games. Like if you're in the content business, if your business is making films or, or whatever it is, or games, yeah, it might be Steam and it might be this over here, but you just follow where the audience. I think in his head, it's that simple. Obviously, the business models and monetization then comes into it, and that's where things get a little bit more complicated. And then you need to scale your business to suit the economic realities of that.
As a publisher being established in the 1980s and the 1990s, the way that content worked was you market, you distribute it to GameStop, Babbage's, where it used to be.
Yeah.
Right. You buy the standees at the store. People come, they acquire it. You've set your price point. You've acquired your customer. On YouTube, you can't really acquire your customer. They are YouTube's customer. On Steam, you can do account linking. But at the end of the day, the reason that nobody's successfully challenged Steam is Steam users are Steam users, right? They're very, very satisfied with their platform, and it is incredibly sticky. Now, luckily on Steam, you'd still get to set your own price point, but there are significant challenges for a number of these platform-like products where you don't necessarily have customer ownership. You will have challenges selling and managing your marketing. You will have challenges being able to do price point setting. You are far more disrupted through them than you are on what the game industry has been up until now.
Yeah, that's true.
In the same way that you'll notice when I said you're a creator on Steam, it's the same word that they say for YouTube. You could be a film studio on YouTube, but you're not really a film studio on YouTube. You don't own the advertising inventory. You can't control it. You can't really compete for what those prices are. That's a very disrupted business, which is why YouTube's value is so high. And so it's challenging for us as content creators.
I'm not going to name him, but 4 or 5 years ago, I was out for lunch with a former PlayStation executive. And he said to me, and he was talking about, coming from the perspective of the consoles, the problem with modern consoles is that once upon a time, a console manufacturer made a box for you to put your games on. Now, a console manufacturer is someone he's your retailer and he's your distributor.
Sure.
And they're increasingly becoming your media as well, right? So it gives them more and more power. And what we're seeing that happen in digital, we've actually seen it happen digital before with Steam, but obviously when it comes to a game like Fortnite, and one of the issues that you've got is that even the things you're selling is related to stuff you buy in Fortnite, because it's a game as well, right? And now the platforms are also the content. You get a situation where the way the monetization works in Fortnite is people buy costumes and things for the characters that are in the game.
Correct.
And that's what you get a cut of. And that's like, you don't even have a control over the things that you
have none whatsoever. Correct. At least on Roblox, you're able to set price point. Like Grow a Garden is somewhat evil. I went and I played it for several hours. It's like, do you want to pay to grow this faster? Do you want to pay to steal from someone else's garden? Feel free to throw us money and we will let you win this game incredibly fast. And by the way, that's very similar to how mobile games work. But that is pushing toward the edge. And by the way, the edge is not very dissimilar from gambling. And if you look at a lot of these mobile games, that's the way they look. And by the way, the mobile market is even worse because do you want to acquire customers? Do you want to go up the mobile rankings? Several $1 billion in user acquisition, please. Please pay Mr. Zuckerberg. Please pay Google. Please pay Apple. And they will let you buy ads in the store. And that's how you get your customer. And your entire business is the arbitrage between your cost of customer acquisition and the amount of money you can squeeze out of that customer within the 14 days before they completely never open your game again.
Earlier, we were talking about being parents. Because I played Grow a Garden also for a similar professional research. And I was surrounded by, I don't know how old they were, 7, 8-year-olds talking to me. And I was like, you know what? There's a reason for almost the opposite network effect here. I understand why Roblox is struggling to break out of the kids side of things. But I don't want my children playing these games. Right?
Yeah, I don't want them either.
And I don't really like them being on YouTube. The kids' YouTube app's pretty good. And because I'm a savvy parent, I said, I know it'll be a safe game to get. I downloaded Angry Birds onto a tablet. I thought this will be one that he'll play. There's a CBeebies app, which is a children's TV channel in the UK. And there's a TV show called Hey Dougie, and basically it's a rip-off of Angry Birds game, and he loves it, but it's not as good as Angry Birds. I thought I'll get him Angry Birds. And I downloaded it, and it's constantly pay extra money to get an extra bird, and it was advertising. I was like, what have they done?
Yes,
I don't know. I do wonder about that sort of Roblox experience, because there is some parental pushback, and you're starting to see it being reported in the mainstream. But we'll see. I'm conscious that we could talk for ages, but there was one. I guess the only thing I was trying to say is reading your points is when I look at a game like Tomb Raider, for instance, or even Final Fantasy, and I think about what they're competing with. I just see them more competing with TV and film and cinema than Fortnite and Call of Duty Warzones or whatever. And I think if you're making a game, if you're somebody in the industry building a business, okay, sure, if you're investing in businesses, it's different. You probably wouldn't want to invest in that space. But if you're building a business that looks at those sort of games, I think those are the things you should be looking at. Those are the things you're trying to compete for them for the time with.
Do you mind if I make a small tangential point to what you're saying? Actually, one of the biggest challenges as an industry that we're facing is the hollowing out of the journalism part of it, which is to say, if you're a small developer, Steam is really hard, just as it's really hard for you to break out on Twitch or YouTube. And so how do you get people aware of your product? Used to be that you would be able to go to these journalists and get them excited. We were trying to pitch DC Heroes United last fall when we were getting ready for its early access launch. I would email a journalist that we'd worked with for years and I'd get a bounce back and they were fired that day. We don't have people covering these titles anymore. And so if you're a new place and Steam is hard, you don't even have people you can get excited that can bring audience to you anymore. It really is harming the ability for the industry to help smaller developers and studios. And it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, no way. It's part of the same system in that it's all driven by algorithms now, right? So the consumer games media space. It's the big stuff that drives the traffic. And that's the traffic that makes the money. When it was the days of magazines, they had pages to fill, right? I worked on an industry magazine, and I had, on an average week, I'd have, let's say 50 pages I had to fill every week. And I'm like, well, I obviously knew what was putting on the cover. I knew what the big stories were. I knew what the big games were. But I would sit there and spend a page on the latest Hello Kitty DS game. And I would do all of this stuff because I had pages to fill. And so there was opportunity. So we learned new things. We met new things. We discovered new things. You think with the internet, it creates an infinite amount of pages. You can write about everything you want. But actually, because the business model's changed, people aren't paying £5 or £2, whatever it is, $5, whatever, for the magazine. It's all driven by advertising. You end up having to, you're going to try and do the things that drive the most traffic so you can get the most advertising dollars.
Yes.
And that creates the scenario where the small stuff doesn't get covered as much. Journalists like covering small and interesting and innovative stuff.
Of course.
So they will try to do those sort of things. But then when the numbers get smaller and smaller and smaller because,
Yeah, what you're describing is the job has changed from writing and promotion to customer acquisition. When you are thinking about how do I drive more numbers to my article, your job is now user acquisition and SEO rather than what it used to be.
Yeah. And before, when you had bigger editorial teams, you could have members of your team doing indie games,
yes,
or quirky games. But when the numbers are getting smaller, you have to deliver those numbers. It's not a world I completely inhabit because I'm in the business media space.
Right.
Even when I was at gamesindustry.biz, we had writers that would write about things that were really important to write about. It could be about, the diversity of the industry, company culture. It could be about those sort of issues, looking at ways to improve them. We had people writing loads of stuff about that. They didn't do huge numbers. They didn't generate huge amount of attention or attraction, but they were important things to write about. But it was okay because you had the other 2 or 3 journalists doing the big interviews and doing that sort of stuff. When the numbers got smaller, well, it wasn't the big interviews and the commercially viable things that were the stuff that got reduced. And that's, yeah. We've talked about the media quite a bit on the show. It's a bit, I'm conscious of the time and we do have a couple of other stories to talk, but one is connected. One thing I didn't mention, actually, you did talk about the June games that didn't do very well in your tweets. You talked about, I get the name wrong, Smilegate 2, is that the name of the game? Splitgate 2?
Splitgate 2, Mind's Eye, FBC Firebreak, and Marathon.
Yeah, well, I will say Mind's Eye wasn't very good. I think that was part of the issue. But there were games that did do very well in June. Dune Awakening did pretty good numbers. And then we also had, I think it's Rematch, the football game from Kepler that did that particularly good numbers.
Who was the developer on Dune Awakening?
Funcom. So it was the Age of Conan folks.
What percentage of the player base was West versus China?
That's a good question.
When you start to see very large concurrent breakout hits, ask that question first and also look at the peak concurrence because then you can start to model it out. What I've found is when you see big breakout hits, they have a large Chinese player base contingent.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that for a fact with Dune. I literally asked the question because I didn't know the answer to it. But the Chinese player base has been one of the things that's been helping Helldivers 2 stay with good concurrency on Steam. It certainly made a big difference for a number of the successful titles. And by the way, that's a good thing. You want large player bases worldwide, but effectively, if you can get the Chinese player base excited, you're able to build those concurrencies.
I'll move on to some of the other news items. We talk about these quite quickly, but one of them is actually connected to the main topic. We did talk about it already, which is Roblox has launched a new licensing program. The The license manager and licenses catalog is designed to enable rights holders of creative works, including major brands, to provide game licenses to Roblox creators. It basically means that these creators can add popular IP into games on Roblox. I found this really interesting is the early things they've signed. So the companies that have signed up include Netflix, who have brought Stranger Things and Squid Game, Lionsgate with Twilight Saw and Now You See Me, and Sega with Like a Dragon. None of these are kids' properties. They're all some of them very adult properties. I'd class it as. So I thought that was quite. I did wonder if that might be because they view it as a user acquisition opportunity for at least a marketing opportunity maybe for some of these titles for when they graduate from Roblox.
If you are any IP holder these days and you want any hope of reaching that young generation, you should probably go and join that licensing program. I don't really see a downside to it. And there's only upside in the early days of being an IP that kids get interested in that can then drive other parts of your business. That may not be the right advice 4, 5 years from now, but today, when it's really, really, really hard to reach those audiences, to start to allow them to build memories with your IP seems to me to be very important. And by the way, this is only upside. Like, you will generate money from it. It won't cost you anything. I would be doing it in a heartbeat.
The other next story, as part of the recent Microsoft cuts, this is reported by mobilegamer.biz, a friend of the publication. 200 staff have been cut by developer King as part of the recent Microsoft cuts. Speaking to mobilegamer.biz, staff claim that they've effectively been replaced by the AI tools they helped build. The London-based Farm Hero Saga team has been cut in half, and the morale of the company is unsurprisingly at an all-time low. This is staff talking to mobilegamer.biz. King's always been very, very big on AI. And in fact, I remember going to see them only at GDC a couple of years ago now. And they talked about how they test and how AI has allowed them to test levels in Candy Crush so much faster. They assign the difficulty level, does it work? And then the creators can tweak it. So in a way, I'm not sure if we can, I do. It feels like I could certainly believe that there has been certain jobs they may have hired for in the past they don't need to do anymore because of that sort of speeding up and that AI automation process. And obviously in mobile, I think when it comes to the impact of AI on games workforces, I think probably areas of the industry where it's a little bit more. There's a process to the creation. There's an algorithm to those sort of things. The AI will likely have a bigger impact. But also I think it's worth noting this is coming from the King staff themselves. It's not Microsoft.
Do we know if those staff were in art and game design or if they were in user acquisition? Because most of these mobile companies are half staffed at user acquisition right now. And it wouldn't surprise me to see that, okay, we've trained the AI to do the buying and selling of ads, testing and A/B work behind the ads. But the game part is a radically different story.
Most of the level design has been wiped and spent months building tools to craft levels quicker. Now those AI tools are basically that. So it's the person who made the statement in this story is somebody who works on the level design side of things. Although I suspect it's not the level designers themselves, it's the sort of testing component of that level design.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah.
We've used a lot of these tools. The stuff for art is okay. It's not great. The game design and coding parts have huge problems and don't really scale well to putting it into your existing stack. It is the user acquisition and testing sides of it, which are not, they were never like the part of the creative engine that I felt was going to be a major differentiator for you as a company, testing your level design and acquiring users. But they're core parts of the business, don't get me wrong, but they're not the thing that's like, this is what makes the gameplay itself differentiated from an art or story or even gameplay itself perspective. And so I just don't want people to be scared thinking AI is going to gameplay out your jobs shortly.
Right.
I don't think that that's going to happen.
I think the only thing that I've had with AI, and interesting, I've gone on a bit of a journey with this myself, is that when I started in games journalism, I came out of university, I didn't have the skills needed to be a top tier. I also didn't have the confidence. I joined the bottom rung of a magazine. And I think if today that had happened, 75% of the things I did when I started could be done by AI just as well. right? And what I worried about is people coming out of education who are looking for that bottom rung first, foot in the door jobs where they learn the industry. They learn, in my case, it would be learning the industry, learning, making contacts, learning the basics of how to interview someone. All of those things that I learned doing really back of the magazine stuff would be gone today. But then I guess back in my day, getting a job on a magazine was what you did. Getting a job on a website is what you did. Nowadays it's you launch a YouTube channel, you set up a blog, you develop a Substack, and it's the same, I guess, with content creation. I know the amount of game designers today, including ones that are like at leading development at games like Fortnite and Call of Duty, who started off testing video games, right? And the journey that they've gone on from that point, learning from the people they were helping and supporting, and that kind of experience, I think is really valuable. But I just think perhaps the way the next generation will learn how to make games is just going to be different to the generation. I think that's the journey I've been on. I've gone from AI as a problem because it's getting rid of the bottom rung. But then I think that you just do an element of self-motivation really to sort of learn these things yourself.
I think AI is a problem, but the problem with industry jobs is separate from the problem of demand. And let me explain. If we go back to the discussion on Perfect Dark, for example, costs no longer work relative to the amount of demand that the game would get at a $400 million production cost relative to a $150 million production cost. That was my argument, right? Demand did not triple enough to justify that price differential. As a result, that game gets canceled. Those people lose their jobs. And if production costs continue to increase and or stay at their current level, we agreed that a 35-person team was the right size as opposed to a 350-person team. Where are those 90% other people going to go? That's where I don't have the answer. And they're not being replaced by AI. They're being put out of jobs because the market isn't there. Yeah. And so as an industry, let's start with that problem and then realize that what's going to happen with AI, and I touched on this in the thread off, is a fundamental realignment of pretty much all acts of human creation. And I know that is a very lofty and weird phrase, but I know of no other way to explain it. The AI animation models are moving so fast. I worked on a 3-minute video preview for a client that would have cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars and a full team of people to produce, that got produced by one person in 6 hours with an AI thing. That doesn't mean I can produce the product with that AI thing, but the prototype video, right, showing what the experience could be like was done instantaneously and at a good enough quality that it's convincing, right? And that's with today's tools. And the point I'm making is next year's tools is going to allow for the creation of Hollywood quality video by anyone. That's a problem possibly for Hollywood, but I'm not making the argument of job displacement. I'm making the argument of, are we as humans ready for anyone to be able to create that level of quality content? What does that mean for demand? What does that mean for deep fakes? What does that mean for presidential elections? Like, that is what I mean when I say it's a fundamental realignment of everything. And I don't know where that goes. I hope that they seriously start debating universal basic income, because there is going to be a lot of change in our lives in the next 10 years as a result of this.
Richard, who's the producer, who probably remains silent, tells me that the AI tools that he uses to help with the audio and the video editing, it does things that he physically wouldn't be able to do in any reasonable time. And so that's not just, it allows him to speed things up and do things faster and do things more efficiently or cheaper. It allows him to do things that he just wouldn't have done otherwise.
It makes the product better. So I'll give an argument, in favor of these things, which is I have an animator working on my DC title. He could produce way more characters for me if he didn't have to do the in-betweens, and the AI could do the in-betweens of the animation for him, right? He's one animator and he has to deliver a Clark Kent skin right? It takes him 2 weeks he does the keyframes and then he does the animations in between. If they did the in between, he could deliver me 5 more skins, which means that I would have more skins to sell, which means that the business could grow better. These are all good things. But at the same time, we're not ready for what that means, the macro scale.
Well, that terrifying thought. I'll end on a slightly more gossipy story.
This is Crafton.
Crafton.
Yeah.
Crafton and the leadership of its developer Unknown Worlds have had a very public falling out over the game Subnautica 2. This actually started much earlier in the month, but continues to escalate. To keep it simple, Crafton replaced the leadership team of Unknown Worlds, including Ted Gill, Charlie Cleveland, and Max Maguire, with Steve Hustis, who previously led Striking Distance Studios. It's another Crafton studio. Crafton then delayed the game's early access from this year until 2026, potentially putting at risk $250 million in developer bonuses. The outed leadership team says it is ready, the game is ready, it can release it. Crafton said no, the game isn't good enough. He said the 250, there was a back and forth of who was going to get that, but did budget bonus, and now Bloomberg is reporting that actually they're making it available to everybody. Crafton, that there's been a leaked document.
Do we know if that 250 was supposed to be in cash or in RSUs?
It probably does say in one of the various reports that I tried to compile all this stuff together. I hear of stories like this in games publishing and development all the time. It's very rare to see it. I think the one that springs to mind is the Infinity Ward bust up between Activision and the creation of Respawn.
It's very rare to see it because it is not good for the public company, right, to have these kinds of problems, which is why for all the people who think that Krafton's trying to get out of paying $250 million, which would most likely be in RSUs, which is why I asked the question. That money was earmarked years ago. The cost of legal and discovery alone, plus the brand damage, are not reasons why you do these things. And so for me, when I see, for example, there was a rock, paper, shotgun op-ed yesterday about this kind of cynicism toward Krafton. Listen, I've been at the executive levels of public companies. Pay them, like they're not cash poor, and they're certainly not stock poor. They're not trying to do these things to save out on a trifling for them. It'd be cart before horse.
Yeah. It's not much to say about this other than it's quite unusual to see it play out in quite a open way, because you talk about brand damage, but like the conversation around this game now is that the game isn't good enough, which I don't think is a message you want to be sending out.
Which is why the publisher would not, like the rock, paper, shotgun op-ed yesterday was saying maybe they intentionally leaked it from the Crafton side. That's insane. If they wanted to leak it, they would have leaked it. You understand how that stuff works. They wouldn't have an employee take a screenshot and put it on Reddit. Like there is no world where they're purposely trying to sabotage their brands, have to deal with this from a management perspective. It's not worth any of the headache or the risk. And so my default assumption is that probably Crafton is correct. We will see what comes out of this, but there are very few situations that I see where it's like, yeah, this is how they wanted it to go.
Yeah. I still think this will probably end with settlement outside of court, and it'll be quietly, nothing more will be said on that.
Well, because they don't want to deal with discovery, right? Like, again, there's no interest in those things, but it is much more likely that that game was not ready. If you're Crafton and you earmarked that money 4 years ago, whenever that acquisition happened, and you're paying it out in RSUs, you are hoping that they built a really good game, and you are wanting to see it released and have your brand increase and have your CEO talk about its great sales on their next quarterly IR call. You don't want them talking about this stuff. And so they are not going around purposely sabotaging green lights to avoid paying money.
Yeah.
The odds are the game wasn't ready.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the game gets ready. Hopefully we'll all forget about this sorry charade, and the game is a hit, then everyone lives happily ever after. Jacob, I thank you so much for your time. I've taken so much time talking to you, and I appreciate you taking time out.
I appreciate it as well.
That's it for today's episode of the Game Business Show. We'll be back next week with more features, news and market data. To make sure you don't miss any of it, head to thegamebusiness.com, put in your email, and you'll receive alerts and emails and write-ups of all future shows that we have planned. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.